Good evening and welcome to tonight's edition of Fact Sheet live on ATV, live on Facebook, Twitter and all our social media platforms. Tonight we are talking about a very important subject matter. About 4 days ago, the Honorable Chairman Sabonsu read the budget on behalf of the Finance Minister, highlighting the revenue targets of government, also highlighting the expenditure plan of government. The plans that government is going to use to rake in money in order to embark on these, developmental projects, mostly infrastructure projects of our nation, Ghana. After the budget reading, several reactions have come forth from Ghanaians, especially those in the industry who understand the dynamics when it comes to the macro and microeconomic indicators when we are having conversations about the budget. Equally important are the expectations of many, especially when it comes to industry and then those in the manufacturing sector, with COVID-19 already wreaking havoc in our society. Tonight, that's our focus as I get joined by my guest for us to interrogate the budget as read by the Honorable Chairman Sabonsu. The benefits that accrue to us, especially when it comes to stimulating growth in our economy, and how that is going to be achieved. The introduction of new taxes and the reliefs that have been given to Ghanaians. All these, how do they, in the final analysis, lead to the growth we are expecting when COVID-19 is still here with us? That's the focus of our conversation tonight, live on the Fact Sheet. My name is Samuel Chen. We'll take a short breather. When we come back, my guests are with me and we'll begin the conversation. And you're welcome back. This is Fact Sheet live on ATV and live on Facebook and Twitter as well. We encourage you to join the conversation with your thoughts, your views, and your comments, even as we deliberate on the matter of the presentation of the budget as done by the Honorable Chairman Sabonsu 4 days ago. So, there are hospitals to be built. There are roads to be constructed. There are school children to be fed. There are school infrastructure projects to be done. There are several other projects that government is supposed to embark on. How feasible would it be with COVID-19 with us? Especially if you go through the budget as presented, we are told that as we speak now, our debt stock as a nation is around 291.6 billion. And our debt to GDP is around 76.1% thereabout. With an economy that is virtually constricted, how do we get money to embark on all these projects? That's where my resource persons come in to interrogate the issue of the budget, as Dr. Paul Frimpong, who is a chartered economist, helps me to digest the issues, and Dr. Edu Owusu Sakori as well joins me. He is with the Department of Economics at the University of Ghana. And gentlemen, good evening and welcome.
Good evening.
Good evening.
All right, so we will set the ball rolling with our own expectations as to the period when the budget was going to be read, what we expected government, the path government was going to choose, whether it was going to be stimulating the economy, whether it was going to be fiscal consolidation, whether the plans that government was going to outline. Doc, I'll start with you. What were you expecting government to do?
Well, we know what COVID did to our economy. So I was expecting this budget to present a position where we can go back to the pre-COVID levels, if nothing at all, to take us back to the pre-COVID levels, which many people call the recovery stage. And so the emphasis will be on provision of essentials and also the provision of safety nets. This has been the practice for many countries in the world. So they tackle three things: provision of essentials, fiscal consolidation, that's in other words being inward looking, and also trying to give bailout for production. And I saw this, but also providing social intervention. I saw this budget as to addressing these concerns. I wasn't surprised at all. In any case, the State of the Nation address gave us some highlights of indication of what we should expect in the budget. So the focus has always, if you take a critical look at the budget, it's been focusing on agric, and production. Even with the taxes, I'm sure we will dwell more into, even with the taxes, it looks like they did not touch the production sector. They rather went into consumption, the taxes on consumption. So that is the picture of the budget. Then, again, when it comes to infrastructure development, even the theme of the budget is talking about completion of the existing projects. So they do not intend to overload themselves with any huge infrastructure projects. And that is why I believe that even the Agenda 111, they may not be able to finish it this year. They may start all right, but they may not be able to finish all the 111. And then even with the year of rules, I am of the view that they can start something, but they may not be able to finish everything. So again, the concluding part of the initial discussion is that many countries are inward looking, and this budget presents that position of inward looking, talking about provision of essentials, fiscal consolidation, focusing on production, and then just a little on infrastructure development. And it is, you mentioned that whether it is recovery or acceleration. If you take a look at the Mpp Manifesto, because they are in government, so we can talk about their manifesto. Yeah. They have what they call the post-2020 section, which talks about recovery. And almost everything they stated there is what they have in the budget. Then they have the following section that talks about acceleration of growth for development and transformation. That bit wasn't captured in the budget. Perhaps they are waiting for the coming years. And my major concern has to do with the virus. There is so much uncertainty about the virus. It is the virus that collapsed the economies of this world, including Ghana. So if we have not contained the virus yet, I am just being hopeful of the targets that we have set for ourselves, especially with respect to GDP growth rate, the revenue growth rate target, etc., etc. So for us to be able to achieve almost all the targets, we need to contain the virus. And if we're able to contain the virus, how do we do it? I mean, the vaccination, a friend told me that vaccine is not equal to vaccination. So the fact that you have the vaccine doesn't mean that, already. So let's vaccinate. If you're able to vaccinate, I mean, the target is about 20 million Ghanaians for this year, able to do the vaccination and contain the virus. Then I'm sure some of the targets that we have set for ourselves, we will be able to reach it. Even before the budget, I am seeing that the economy is healing by itself. Even before the budget. What I mean by this is that if you have 80% of your economy in the informal sector, which requires physical human interactions, and then you lock it down, obviously you're going to collapse your economy. That is why the second and third quarter, we recorded negative growth rate. And I think we have seen the easing of these restrictions, and that is helping the economy to heal by itself. And I can give you a typical example. Education. When the schools were closed down, many of the economic activities that were related to education did not flourish. For example, the bookshops, those who sell stationery, those who sell, University of Ghana, for example, those who sell at the night market. You go there, you only see 3 people. Now, schools can reopen, and so all those related economic activities are booming, and so it's healing by itself. But that notwithstanding, some of the businesses that collapsed, it will take them a while before they revive, because like those in the hotels, tourism, in the other hospitality industry, it will take them some time before they heal. But many of these businesses are recovering, and so the economy is healing by itself. And then also with a few government interventions, I am sure, but the government has not forgotten about the social protection, which is key. And I'm of the view that in times of economic difficulties, governments must give relief to both individuals and firms. And this has been the practice in 1929 Great Depression. This was the practice in 2008 global financial crisis. We remember Obama's bailout. So every country was giving relief, bailouts for consumers and for producers. People gave as much as 25% of their GDP as a bailout. You can mention countries like France, Spain, Italy, US, UK. They were all giving between 10 and 25% of their GDP as a relief. So this budget hasn't forgotten about the relief, social protection, the need to even cushion the poor. Even with the taxes, they have imposed the taxes, but they've gone through the back door to cushion the poor with the subsidies and other
we will
incentives.
come to that. We will come to that point because I've had several views being expressed by economists and those who understand the dynamics when it comes to these issues. Some describe it as counterproductive, the steps that government has taken. But you feel that it's an approach that's workable. Dr. Paul, your initial reaction to the budget in terms of your expectations and whether they were met or not.
Good evening. Good evening to your cherished viewers as well. Just let me make point of correction. I'm not doctor yet. So
okay,
yes,
that's fine.
Yes,
Forgive
so
me.
Yes.
Forgive me.
I'm just a Mister.
Mister,
for
that's
now.
fine. That's fine.
Yeah. So I think I looked at the budgets as was read by the Honorable Minister Chairman Sabonsu on Friday, and for me, I think any budget that is read post-election, you get to have a sense of reality being put out there. Because we just had an election in December, so obviously the next election is the next 4 years. So if you are in charge of an economy that has gone through an election, obviously we know the cyclical effect that elections have on managing our economy. Every election year, things get out of hand, and so some figures and other issues are either massaged or kept away from the public in the interest of making sure that you can be retained in power. So we usually have that kind of information, lack of information within that kind of period. So anytime we have an election, after election, we get to see some bit of reality in the budget that we have. And clearly, this budget that was read on Friday has shown to every Ghanaian that this is where we are in terms of how we can sustainably contain the social programs that we have. Remember, as we are seeing now, this current government has come up with a number of social programs, which is typical of even more like a socialist kind of society. I mean, example is a free senior high school program, and in the COVID era, we saw a lot of reliefs that was being issued by the government, the free water, electricity to lifeline consumers and what have you, the healthcare frontliners package and all of that. So for me, I was expecting some bit more of reality, and I saw that in the budget that was read. So and the other reality that came out of the budget is how we are going to finance all these largesse that came in to support the general populace and businesses within this difficult time that we find ourselves.
But let me pause you for a second. You talk about the realities in the budget. What are these pointers?
So for example, I mean, it's clear that whatever money that was used to give us the free water or the cost involved, now it's clear that we have to be the one to pay for it. And that is what government is showing. Unfortunately, we look at the financing bit of it. I mean, look at the expenditure and the revenue that is coming in. We know that there's a deficit. Now, due to this COVID-19 and its impact on, in fact, every economy in the world, what government strategies have to do is to look internally to be able to generate revenue, to be able to cater for the remainder of the expenses that will not be covered by the revenue that you expect to generate. And that is why we are going to have the issue of some of the new taxes that have been introduced as we will go deeper into it.
Exactly.
Because when you go out there, of course, you have the chance to raise money from the market, the international market, but at this time it's going to be very, very costly to be able to raise money on the international market, which of course most government will still try and go for it. As we've seen, and of course we'll go into detail, the expenditure components of this year's budget, as was read by the minister, shows that about 90% is going to revenue is going to just two line items, which is, I mean, again, it's a reality on the ground. But of course, if you have a budget where you have more of the recurrent expenditure, which has been a trend for a while now, more always overtaking the capital expenditure, then we still have fundamental questions to ask. Of course, you might have some macro indicators, and of course, 2020 is more like the outlier in terms of what happened globally. But we've seen some trends in terms of even revenue targets from 2017, 2018, 2019. We've seen revenue targets dwindling. So even if you take 2020 out, which everybody will agree because of what is happening globally, we still have been facing a trend of a downward trend in terms of revenue mobilization targets. So in this budget, we've seen that we're talking about 30-something, 32 or so percent in that regard. I'm still not so much convinced that that is something that we can be able to achieve in the fact that we've still not been out of this COVID-19 situation.
All right, so let's try and do some little analysis going by the presentation as made by the minister. I was talking about earlier the point about the total expenditure as government has programmed itself that it's going to make about 113 million thereabouts, and then billion, sorry,
yeah.
And then revenue expected is also not even up to that amount of money.
Yeah.
So there's a deficit already.
Correct.
That is waiting for us. Then we talk about our debt to GDP ratio at the moment, where it is, hanging around 76.1%,
yeah.
and then our debt stock as well. Then it brings us to the issue about the release that Doc was talking about, that we are being told that government was going to suspend income tax stamp payment to beneficiaries who previously would have been paying this tax, which is supposed to be a form of relief to these entities as well. Suspend vehicle income tax, which is going to the trotros and the taxis and co. Then there is the tax relief of 30% on corporate tax as well. And then the final one is a waiver of penalty and interest on accumulated tax and arrears up to December of last year. How do we, in seeking to bring some relief to Ghanaians, achieve this with these, rebates, let me put it that way, or reliefs being put in place, Doc?
How do we achieve what? The relief?
How do we achieve the process of firstly stimulating growth and then also bringing some relief to businesses and individuals who are being captured per these reliefs that have been given?
Well, I think the statement is self-explanatory in that the focus here is on production. I think they have identified a number of businesses that were seriously hit by the COVID, and they are providing those reliefs for them. So, for example, the 30% income tax rebate given to the hotels, instead of paying that 30% to the government has asked them to keep it. Now the question is, I think you asked me that question earlier on, that if the hotels are running and nobody goes to patronize the hotels, then what do they do? I think the sense I get here is that it's for them to pay the workers so that the workers will be able to, get something, because we have more than 700 workers who have been affected, whose incomes have been affected by the COVID. So yes, they are identifying one or two things, and it is not only these reliefs. Remember that in the year 2020, they spent 750 million Ghana cedis to support small, medium enterprises, micro enterprises, then additional 2 billion cedis to support large enterprises. So whatever we see in the budget now is in addition to whatever they started in the year 2020. So we should expect some pickers. Like I said, some of the businesses were already picking up. They were, getting back on track because of the easing of the restrictions, because our economies are largely informal. So when you ease restrictions, they begin production. When you close down, they lose. So when you begin to ease the restriction, it helps on itself. And then the additions that we have stated in the budget, the previous amounts, 2,750 million plus these reliefs. The 2 billion and the 750 were more like a direct transfer from government to them. These reliefs are like indirect savings by them, so that you have this amount, 100 cedis. Government says that don't pay it to me. Use it to boost production. And this is the administration that believes in the private sector. Government cannot do everything. So they are allowing the private sector to also get down to business and also provide a support for them. The reliefs and the soft loans are not the only only avenues.
That's where my question then
Yes.
comes in, because I am thinking that if indeed we want to stimulate growth, these reliefs should rather be targeted at the manufacturing sector of the economy, not the consumption sector of the economy. Because if you, for instance, decide that, let's say there's a phone manufacturing company in Ghana, and you give that phone manufacturing company that 30% tax relief, that company now has the capacity to produce extra of this and even employ more hands. So then the system begins to quicken itself. But if you are giving it to a consumption, industry, where necessarily they don't produce, they are waiting for me to come and spend before they also get something, then virtually we have gone zero.
Well, okay, so a number of these reliefs are on the production side, I should say. If you are talking
Which of them are on the
the
production
release
side?
on the hotels, are you talking about manufacturing?
Yes, I'm
or
talking about
production in
manufacturing
general?
and industry.
The Bank of Ghana reduced their policy rate from 16% to 14.5% with the hope that it will trickle down to the reduction of interest rates. And we know for a fact, according to the Banks Association of Ghana, I heard that they've been able to advance over 2 billion Ghana cedis in terms of credit to the private sector because of this 2% reduction in interest rate. I admit that we haven't been able to achieve, a greater percentage of that, but it is still a good step. It's still a good starting point to start giving relief. So the manufacturing sector that you're talking about, already the exchange rate is stabilized. Have you heard anybody complain about the exchange rate in the year 2000
Not
and now?
necessarily.
No, because the exchange rate is depreciating by less than 4%. So it is a good sign for them. The manufacturing sectors always look at power. Ghana has enjoyed a stable power supply for some time now. And so manufacturing sector is benefiting. Inflation, of course, it was in single digit, then COVID raised it to 11%. Now it came back to 9, and then now we are still doing 10. They also look at inflation and all that. So I am of the view that the manufacturing sector hasn't been left out.
But the point you make about the monetary policy rate and its commensurate reduction in interest, you would agree with me that with COVID-19 in the system, the risk factor of a loan makes it virtually impossible for banks who are already risk averse giving money, regardless of the monetary policy rate reducing from 16.7 or something to 14.5 presently. So then it defeats it. Whether the monetary policy rate even now comes to, let's say, 12%, that risk factor alone makes it impossible for some of these businesses. And I think about 2 weeks ago, I spoke to the AGI, and they made a point that, look, accessing loans in the banks is problematic because the banks have become more risk averse with COVID-19.
Yes. Risk factor has always been with us. And so, yes, we know in this country access to credit is one of the major challenges of the manufacturing sector. But the point I'm making is that it is some help that the government has been able to provide for the private sector to pick up. If you are talking about acceleration, we should leave acceleration for the coming budgets, which is next year or next 2 years. But this time round, the emphasis is on recovery. So you were here, you fell down, and I think the objective is to bring you back to the pre-COVID levels. So anything about acceleration, anything about booming production cannot be addressed in this first budget of recovery. Those issues should be left for the coming budget. But this budget specifically is about helping businesses and individuals which collapsed to come back to pre-COVID levels after that. Then we can address some of these challenges have been with us for years. it is not COVID that brought these risk factors. It is not COVID that made credit, so expensive. So some of these, fundamentals, the structural problems have always been with us. And I'm not saying that we should condone it. I am saying that at this point, you cannot resolve every issue and talk about acceleration. You only have to talk about recovery up to the pre-COVID levels, and then moving forward, if you want to address any bottleneck, if you want to address any risk factor, if you want to address any industrial drive, then you can talk about it in a 2020 budget and 2023 budget.
All right. Let me seek the views of Paul on this matter. Paul, you think that these reliefs were properly targeted?
Well, first of all, I think in order to appreciate or otherwise of these happy fellow Ghanaians tax relief, so they called it, we need to juxtapose it to also the new 5 or 6 taxes that have been introduced. From the budget, the same budget. That will give us a sense of whether to appreciate these reliefs or not. Now, on both sides, I have challenging to some of them. For example, the new taxes that have been introduced, there are some, I don't know if you go deeper into
yes,
that.
We'll go deeper into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are some that I agree that it's prudent and it makes sense that they are introduced. There are some things that I have huge challenge with. At the same time, these reliefs, there are some two that I think are good. There are some two that I'm trying to find a balance as to how the impact is going to be. For example, the one on the, let me read from here, the suspend vehicle income tax, the trotros and taxis and what have you. If you look at that, at the same time, you're going to have an increment in fuel price increment. I mean, the same budget regards to the new taxes that have been introduced. So, in this sense, how are we trying to find the middle ground of how this is going to help the trotros or the taxis? Because they are also consuming these petroleum products day in and day out. And there has been an increment, a new tax increment on that side. And you are also providing this, suspend this relief. Now, we need to know the impact. How are they going to factor in the cost of the fuel as against this suspended tax that has been given? And how are they going to, pass on the difference, whether to consumers or when they strike the difference between the tax that have been introduced and this relief, they'll be at where they were, previously. So that's some of the challenge that I have in respect to this. But on the whole, on the budgets, clearly, like I said, there's a bit of reality that has come in. That this is our situation, because look at the budget where 2 line items is taking 90% of it, of your revenue. And again, you have a deficit of about 40 billion Ghana cedis. So you are trying to spend 113 billion, and you are raising 72 billion, and there's a difference about 40 billion which you need to finance. That's the deficit that we are talking about. Yeah. And out of this 113 billion, you have 2 line items taking about 60-something% of the entire spend. And these 2 line items, as we know, these are all recurrent expenditure, because you're going to use about 49% to pay interest on loans or interest on debt that you already have, not the principal, only the interest. About 49%, that's almost 50% of the money that you say you're going to spend in the country, you're going to use to pay interest on loans. And here is the situation. Of course, look at interest payment. It's not interest that you will say is being caused by the current government, because when you look at some of the interest that they're going to pay, these are interest going to be paid on some of the borrowings that we did some 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and whatever. They are now maturing. At the same time, you know that they are also going to borrow new money, which is going to mature in 7 years, 15 years, 20 years time. So in a way, they just came out and let us know that this is where we are. And like I said, with post-election, you need to come clean and make sure you stand on your toes and deal with some of these critical issues, because the interest is due. You have to pay. Otherwise, these comes with other penalties too. So I think we have a real challenge at our hand. And so while some of the reliefs are going to have a bit of impact, and of course, some of them too, it has to be based on the fact that the businesses that you're giving this relief to have to be able to do business before they can actually have benefit of these reliefs. Because the hotels are not getting any business because there's still COVID around us, and we know that the tourism sector, which the hotel industry is part of, is greatly affected. So if they are not doing any business in terms of economic activity, then obviously these reliefs will not also serve them, that much. At the same time, you have taxes that have been to us, we go deeper, which is going to affect each and every one of us, whether you're in the hotel sector or not.
Well, when we come back from the short break we are going to, Doc, I will start with you because we have already had a conversation on this one of the days in the morning. So that we'll look at the introduction of these new taxes and whether, if we compare the reliefs and the taxes, whether in any way it would help mitigate some of the issues we are raising. And so if you just join us this evening, this is Fact Sheet Live on ETV Live on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as well. We're just taking a short breather. We'll be right back. So you're welcome back. This is Fact Sheet Live on ETV, and we are discussing the budget, the introduction of new taxes and reliefs that were given. We're trying to understand the reasoning, the logic behind these taxes and reliefs that were given Ghanaians. And my guest, Dr. Edu Owusu-Sarkodie, with me, and we're doing justice to the issue. So is Mr. Paul Frimpong. He's a chartered economist, also here, helping me to understand the reasoning behind government's decision to impose some taxes and some areas to bring in some reliefs in terms of some tax reliefs that were brought in. But quickly, let's go to the point that Mr. Frimpong, you were making about the new taxes that were brought in and how it's going to impact government's agenda of stimulating growth in the country. So we are told that there is a sanitation and pollution levy of 10 pesos, which is going to be on a liter of petrol and diesel under the SLAP. We are also being told that there's a financial sector cleanup levy of 5% on profit before tax for banks as well. Then we are being told that there's been the introduction of energy sector recovery levy of 20 pesos per liter on petrol and diesel. Then there's a COVID-19 health levy of 1% on VAT flat rate and 1% on the National Health Insurance levy. And these are some of the things that were highlighted. I know that the budget also talked about upward adjustments of tolls at most of our, how do you call it, highways and co. Doc, would these help government in the long run, as much as these are efforts at generating revenue, initiate growth?
Many countries now are doing inward looking. They are trying to slow down the rate of borrowing. And even if they have to borrow at all, they want to borrow domestically. So when you're driving a car and you want to stop, you don't apply the brake at once. You reduce the speed. So first of all, you have to reduce the speed of borrowing. And secondly, you have to try to do domestic borrowing more than the external because of the effect of exchange rate. Then thirdly, you have to mobilize resources domestically. This is something I have been championing for some time now, that this country cannot continue to be relying on borrowing for the coming years because of the huge public debt staring us at the face. So then we have to do domestic resource mobilization. First of all, I wasn't expecting these taxes to be introduced this year, given the uncertainty surrounding the virus. I was thinking that let's use this year to manage and contain the virus and then see that our economy is picking up. Then next year you can introduce those taxes. But be it as it may, they have already introduced it. But if indeed you are seriously looking at revenue mobilization, then there are other areas that we have always been talking about. You did not tackle them. That is my worry. If indeed you want to be serious about revenue mobilization, how about the other areas that we have been talking about?
What are these areas?
Property rates, tax exemptions. The tax exemption, last year, government paid 2 billion Ghana cedis tax exemptions. This year, they are budgeting to pay 3 billion Ghana cedis. These tax exemptions alone can finance free SHS. As for the fines and tolls, I am of the view that it should be increased. Because how can we pay 50 cedis for passport? If you are able to buy passport or get your passport and travel, you should be prepared to pay more. So certain things like the passport fees should be increased. The tolls, if you increase the tolls, you see, that is why I am of the video, it should have been a holistic approach, comprehensive approach, using the digital. In the SONA, the president mentioned, using the national card to be the TIN numbers, the TIN, and then also roping in 12 million more Ghanaians. No amount was stated in the budget that this digitization will help us, mobilize this amount of resources. That wasn't stated in the budget. And I was surprised that if indeed you want to mobilize resources domestically, why don't you look at the holistic approach? It will not affect the economy negatively. If you do the digitization, it will not affect the economy negatively. If you embark on efficient collection of taxes, it will not affect the economy negatively. If you are serious about plugging the loopholes that we have been talking about all these years, it won't affect us. Why would you want to raise the tolls and go by the traditional ways of collecting coins? We travel all the time. Have you seen any country where they collect coins on the highways? Why don't you get a digital card like we do at Legon? You come to the University of Ghana, for example, no card, no entry, unless you go through Oponglo. And then when you have that, then we all will see that, yes, this government is very aggressive about transforming the economy and also going the digital and raising revenue for us. But you just raise the tolls and still people are collecting coins, knowing that obviously when people collect physical cash, the likelihood that they will pocket some before it gets to the authorities is very high. So, and then if you do this card, the electronic card, it affords government to get what we call the front-loaded funds. Because you are doing it for a period anyway. Like University of Ghana card, you buy it for a period. And it doesn't matter the number of times you use it in a day. So you buy a card, you are using saloon card, you buy, say, 1,000 cedis for the whole year. A 4x4, 2,000 for the whole year. It doesn't matter the number of times you ply on the motorway. And by January, government will have all the funds in his hands because you buy the card upfront and you pay upfront. So the government will have what we call the front-loaded funds to start with that. So that is my argument about the revenue. I am all for the revenue, but you see, the approach they are using is not holistic enough for us to see the seriousness in revenue mobilization. And let me go deeper into the taxes before we look at the link with growth. Most of the taxes that I have observed here, I think I said in your morning show that it is on consumption rather than production. It is not directly on production. When we say something is directly on production, for example, it's like corporate tax, corporate income tax, profit tax. All those are directly on the firms producing. But these ones, VAT, if you don't go to buy something, you don't pay. If the VAT is on this mobile phone, if you don't want to pay, then don't go and buy it. If you don't want to pay for the increment, the pesos, then don't go and buy fuel. So it is rather on consumption than production. Obviously, there's some linkage, but I'm not saying that the firms will never buy fuel and they will never pay. I'm saying that the direct imposition of the tax was on consumption other than production, the direct imposition. Now, whenever a tax is imposed, there's something we call the incidence of taxation, the burden. Is it on the producer or on the consumer? Looking at these taxes, the burden is on the consumer than the producer. And it makes logical sense because they're already allowing production to pick up. So they are not tackling producers. They're rather coming onto consumers.
But that point you make about production and then consumption, if you check the 2017, 2018, 2019, even the 2016, 2015 budget, you'd realize that the service sector was doing tremendously well in terms of revenue generation. And these service sector folks are the people you classify as being under the consumption. And so if they fall under the consumption and they are the ones being taxed, then virtually it is the people who are going out there to bring in the revenue to support the manufacturing sector, which is down now, who are being taxed.
No,
or
I don't
you don't get the
that
point.
way. How would the manufacturing sector is not
So
taxed?
for instance,
Yes.
I work in an industry, I work in a telco. It is the telcos that are making a lot of money now because people are making a lot of calls and video and all of that. Now, I work with a telco, let's say, as a call assistant or whatever. There's been an imposition of this tax on trotros. The trotro increases is fair. I have to pay for it. Now, I am going to do my work, though it is not a production, it's not a manufacturing, but I'll be suffering from the impact of that thing. And so virtually what it goes to do is that the people that you are classifying as not being necessarily in the manufacturing zone are the ones who are being impacted the most. Though they are the ones who are also virtually holding the government in terms of revenue generation.
Okay, so let me finish my analysis on the incidence of taxation. The point I have made is that I am not saying that producers will never pay any of these taxes. I'm saying that the direct imposition of these taxes, they were a bit careful not to impose it directly on producers, but rather on consumers. You are making a point that yes, we all buy fuel, but those in the telcos already have profits. So the impact on them will not be that much. That's the point you're making. But rather the manufacturing sector, that is why some of the companies have been given relief. Remember that the telcos don't have relief. The relief wasn't given to telcos. It was given to those areas, the tourism industry that was seriously hit, and it will take them years before they recover. So they were a bit careful to support them. So the relief, more or less, will come to negate the effects of the taxes and normalize it.
That point, let me see Mr. Frimpo's view on that. These reliefs, would they necessarily negate the impact of these taxes?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, as Doc was trying to explain about the new taxes that have been introduced, so majority of them, it's on the consumption side. Simply put, all of us. Okay, that's the point that you were also trying to make about the person who works in the telco. The tax is not put on the telecom company, but it's put on the trotro because the fuel price increases, and then the person getting the salary, I'm coming to work, I have to pay more to get to work. So obviously, I'm being impacted. Now, so that is where I have the challenge with some of the taxes that were introduced. So, for example, the review of the existing road tolls, okay. I'm okay with it. But when you introduce taxes like NHIL and VAT and something like the energy sector recovery levy, already we have other energy sector recovery that we're already paying tax on, that we're already paying tax to be able to recover. And now we have a new one that has been introduced, that's 20 pesos per liter on fuel, which is also going on fuel. And of course, you have the sanitation and pollution levy, 10 pesos per liter, also going on fuel. So obviously, we are looking at two of these tax components being put on fuel. And the moment we touch anything regarding the petroleum sector in terms of fuel increment, virtually what you're saying that every one of us, unless you're going to be in your house and you're going to move to any place, as long as you're moving from your house, you're going to be affected. So again, as Dr. was saying offline, of course, there's going to be a bit of balance between the relief that's being given to the major group, which is the tractor, and the taxis, which are more of take a greater part of our transportation in terms of our country. The kind of negotiation you're going to have with them to see how the increment that will come as a result of these new taxes that have been imposed on the fuel prices will be able to be offset by this relief that you're giving them. But of course, that will be subject to negotiation. And as we know, obviously, we should all expect an increment in transportation fares and whatever. So the moment you introduce consumption tax, obviously every one of us, like VAT, everyone is going to be part of it. Now, when looking at introducing tax, as you mentioned, about the incidence of tax, where is the burden going? Now, we've been very slow and very lazy, let me put it this way, in terms of how we've been trying for so many years now as a country to be able to have innovative way of mobilizing our taxes. Ideally, in every economy, the government's first major source of revenue is going to be taxes. It has to be domestically. What you get out there is going to come in two forms, whether it's grants that you've been given, in terms of support, budgetary support that you're going to get from developing partners, or you're going to borrow, which is also going to come at a cost. So the best safe way for you to raise enough revenue is to be able to mobilize internally in a very innovative and efficient way that you can make you get more from internally without having to rely on grants, such that when these economies that are supposed to release grants to support, they are also facing challenges, then you're also not going to get anything from them. Again, if your indicators are not strong enough, you will go out there, you will not be classified as credit worthy, yet you want to borrow, fine, we'll give you the money, but we're going to charge you more before we give you the money. So when you look at what the government is trying to do in terms of these new taxes that have been introduced. Now, you mentioned, as Doc mentioned, the government in the State of the Nation address, the president said that some millions of Ghanaians are going to be part of the tax net in terms of through the Ghana card that was done. Now, we need to interrogate that number to see the value that is going to bring in terms of revenue from those numbers. So we can't just start celebrating that because we are going to get everyone who has a Ghana card to be roped on into the tax, turn into a 10 number for you to pay tax. Then eventually our revenue is going to go up. We need to interrogate the numbers. In fact, how many of these, I mean, the Ghana, of course, those who are already paying tax are part of these numbers who have the Ghana card. Again, how many of the people who have the Ghana card are actually in the productive activity? Again, what are the new measures that we are going to use to make sure that those new people that we are bringing on board, we can actually, because we have people in the productive activities who are not paying tax, and that's what we are talking about, how to expand to be able to get these people to pay. And you are bringing on board new people, which of course you don't know whether in any productive activity, and even if they are, what are the means that you're going to use to be able to take the taxes from them?
All right.
So these answers
unfortunately, our time is far exhausted, but I would want to ask a quick question about all that has been said and its implications on the macro. Because obviously, these transport fares increment would affect prices of goods and services. And so it would go to affect the macroeconomic, the inflations and the rest of them. Doc, are we ready for that?
I'm not sure we can meet the 8% target of inflation this year for several reasons. Number one, the international crude oil price itself is increasing.
True.
Number two, it is good that exchange rate is stabilized, but the exchange rate is a contributor of the export prices. Number three, these taxes and levies are also going to increase prices, and it will feed into the non-food component of inflation. So I am very, very skeptical about the 8% target that they have set. Let's hope that if we are able to contain the virus, then the GDP growth rate of 5%, we are likely to get it. We are likely to get there. The issue about the revenue target is my worry. We may not get the revenue target. I have just quickly gone through some of the targets that they set for themselves and the growth rate. In the year 2017, the revenue grew by 23%. 2018, 15%, 2019, 11%, 2020, 4%. The highest for this administration has been 23%. The average for the 4 years is 13%. How on earth would somebody project 31% revenue growth rate? It's not likely. Because your highest without COVID has been 23%. Why would you project 31% revenue growth rate in the midst of COVID? So for that one, I doubt it. If we reach it, then it will be miraculous. and the issue I was saying about the taxes is that most of the taxes that we have talked about are regressive in nature. In Ghana, it's only the income tax which is progressive. The other taxes are all, the indirect taxes are all regressive, meaning that the burden falls on the poor more than the rich. And that is why I was saying that the government was smart to go through the back door to cushion some of the producers like truck drivers and taxi drivers, and also to cushion some consumers in the bracket of poor and vulnerable. You know, remember the subsidy for water and electricity lifeline consumers. So that government was very smart to go behind the back door to cushion the poor and the vulnerable. So in the end, the burden is on the rich, rather. And yes, there is relief. Yes, there is tax. But when you strike the balance, the taxes will be more than the reliefs, and in the end, I'm sure prices will increase. So for the inflation target, it's not likely.
All right.
depreciation of the cedi would be stable for a long time because of the loans that we have taken. Look, and that we are going to take.
I'm sorry, but our time is far exhausted. I'll give you 30 seconds, Paul, to just give us your...
Yes, I think for me, we've been dwelling on some macro indicators to show how well the economy is doing. I'm looking forward to the point where we can rope in other new indicators, which is being used by other countries, because the GDP has been banded around for so long now. People are really skeptical when you say GDP this, GDP that. So I'm looking at other indicators where we can use, like the Human Development Index, the Gini coefficient. These are new happiness index, which is being used by other countries to measure the pulse of the economy. And this goes core to the people, because when you're measuring the happiness index, which is also economic indicator, then you know the real strength of your economy. So for me, I'm looking at the point where we will migrate from just these few macro indicators that have always been bundled around, and make sure that we come in with other new indicators that will tell us the strength and the pulse of our economy. And that's when we can see the growth that we want.
I'd like to thank my guest, Mr. Paul Frimpong, who is a chartered economist, and Dr. Edu Owusu-Sarkodie, Department of Economics, University of Ghana, giving us deep insights into a proper understanding of the budget as read by the Honorable Osei Chairman Sabonsu 4 days ago. This has been a discussion on the budget, and God willing, tomorrow there will be a repeat broadcast of the show on ETV at exactly 10 a.m. My name is Samuel Eshai. Thank you for being a part of the discussion tonight.